Well, good afternoon. It is October 20th, 2023. It is Friday. I started my morning today bright and early at 5 a.m. So this is the weekend for me. We're almost there. Huzzah. Now, if you're like me, some of you might actually do some work over the weekend, but you know what? It's still a victory. I'm taking it. My name is Logan Edmonds. I'm CEO of Tabernacle Technology Solutions, and you are here today for our webinar, How to Manage Cyber Risk as a Startup. It's a really interesting topic. I actually spent most of today at basically a state of venture capital for various investments and startups in Central Ohio, and a lot of this goes into risk management is becoming a bigger and bigger deal to be startup. You have a very precise window, right, to get your service offering, your product, whatever it is you're selling off the ground. And we're going to be talking today about cyber risk and how that relates to that, and what some things you should be looking at to be managing this. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Before I get started, actually, I'm gonna take that back. At any point today, you say, "Hey, look, webinar is cool and all, but I have questions. I want a real person to answer for me." We got you covered. So you can do one of two things. One, you can always just use this nice little QR code in our top left-hand corner to go ahead and schedule a one-on-one appointment with our cybersecurity team. It's a free cyber strategy session. It takes you to a calendar, and you can just pick a time slot that works best for you. No strings, no hassles. Again, free cyber strategy session. Maybe you want to workshop something or just put something out there that you would like an expert opinion on. Feel free to take advantage of that. That is going to be up for the entirety of the webinar. The other thing you can do is we now have chats open for LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. So we're going to be, as well as our website. So we're going to be going ahead and taking questions throughout the day. And if you have any questions at any point, if you want anything clarified, anything of that nature, go ahead and just post them in chat. I'll be pausing throughout this webinar probably 3 or 4 times to answer questions. So let me go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to start off with a statement I think nobody's going to disagree with. Technology and are revolutionizing the way we do business. They are revolutionizing they have been revolutionizing, and they will continue to revolutionize. They've revolutionized uh, operations. They revolutionized the opportunity for growth, for scaling, and for efficiency. I mean, technology and innovation is an amazing boon to everyone involved. But like with most opportunities, there are inherent risks that need to be managed when it comes with technology and innovation. First off, we got to ask ourselves a question about risk. Does ignoring risk make it go away? For me, the answer is no. But that's an answer that only every individual that's an answer each individual has to come to on their own. Does ignoring risk make it go away? Broadly speaking, there are five basic methods for risk management. And this is just from my understanding, of course, but you have avoidance, transferring, retention, loss prevention and reduction, and sharing. And we're going to talk about these basic five methods and as they relate to cyber risk throughout this webinar. Well, first off, cyber risk. What is it? Cybersecurity risk. Well, let's define it. Cybersecurity risk refers to the potential for unauthorized access, use, disclosure, disruption, modification, or destruction of information in a business. It can also entail financial losses, damage to an organization's reputation, and legal repercussions. It is influenced by a firm's use of technology, the nature of its business operations, and the strategies in place to safeguard against a range of vulnerabilities and threats. You can just Google cybersecurity risk, cybersecurity attack, and startup, and you'll get bombarded with all kinds of stuff. Particularly, two things I quoted. The first one's a little shorter. It's just a quick headline of from this year, March 10th, 2023. Mental health startup exposes personal information of more than 3 million people. That's a mental health startup called Cerebral. And then I'm going to go ahead and quote this from sifted.eu. The headline of the article is Hackers are watching your startup. Not many are prepared for the attack. Data breaches, and this is a quote, are usually associated with big names, hefty scandals, big names, huge scandals, and hefty fines. Think Facebook or Google. But startups too are regular targets of malicious online activity. In 2020, hackers leaked 1 million customer emails from French crypto startup Ledger, and it is now facing legal action from dozens of those affected. Hackers aren't just after sensitive data. Cyber attacks can take different forms, ranging from ransomware, when a company's information or systems are held hostage in exchange for a monetary sum, to cybercrime, tricking someone into sending money to the wrong person. These attacks target organizations of all sizes, but it is a risk often underestimated by startups who don't see themselves as a prime target for hackers, especially in the early days, when from zero to when there are 30, 40, 50 people on board. There isn't much focus on cybersecurity, says E. Kenneth Pentamonti, principal at Cyber Focus VC Paladin Capital Group. Cybersecurity company DynaRisk recently analyzed the cyber risk profile of portfolio companies for 75 leading VC funds in London, assessing criteria ranging from leaked usernames and password combinations to the reoccurrence of company names in hacker groups on the dark web. It found that 65% of portfolio companies showed a high risk of suffering a cyber attack. 65%. Examples specifically of cybersecurity risks in cyber startup, they can be phishing attacks when someone impersonates a trusted partner, whether it's a vendor, a customer, a business partner, etc., via email, and tries to trick you into giving up things like clicking the link to give up your password or pretending to be someone you trust to get you to give up information you shouldn't. Ransomware is another. We talked about ransomware. It's a type of malware that locks your data until you pay a ransom. Even outdated software, things is not updating Google, like not updating Google Chrome, not updating Adobe. Those old softwares might have security holes in them that hackers can use to get into your systems. All of these things are examples of cybersecurity risks. The FBI IC3 serves as a public data or public resource for organizations to submit reports of cyber attacks and incidents. Takeaways, they released their 2022 report. And so I have some takeaways after I read it that I'd like to share with you. So, takeaways from the 2022 FBI IC3 report. Number one, business email compromise, BEC. That's when someone just busts into your email account, whether by stealing your password, guessing your password, getting you to click a phishing email to get your login information, etc. They just get into your email. That's Business Email Compromise 101. Was a significant threat in 2022 as it received 21,832 complaints, totaling more than 2.7 billion with a B in adjusted losses. BEC methods have evolved and become more sophisticated. They're not the Nigerian prince, right? Like these are actual honest to goodness scams that can be difficult to detect sometimes. Ransomware is another threat that cannot be ignored. The IC3 received over 2,385 ransomware complaints in 2022 alone. You see, I have some stats on the left hand side showing how it's looking in Q3. Call center fraud cost victims were also can't be underestimated. There are two types of call center fraud victims that were primarily identified: either the tech/customer support style, where they pretend to be technical support, customer support for a trusted vendor, think like pretending to be Microsoft support, or government impersonation, think fake call from the IRS. Right? The IRS never will call you. That's pretty commonly known. They always officially certify mail you, or they just mail you. So with that, and just to give you a highlight, we were talking last month about all about the MGM casino ransomware incident, right? Like that was out in Vegas, multi-billion dollar business, shut down for a month. Like it was big news in my sphere. But the criminals that facilitated that attack were broadcasting on the internet, and they were allegedly saying that what allowed them to shut down that multi-billion dollar business, its root cause was a 10-minute phone call where someone impersonated probably tech support, customer support, somebody to their IT team. So by picking up the phone, 10-minute phone call is the root event that causes a multi-billion dollar business to report, this is last I read, over 100 million in losses for Q3. 10-minute phone call equals 100 million losses for a multi-billion dollar organization. I would say that's pretty good evidence of, from a subjective point of view, that call center fraud can be costly. And if you think the cloud is safe, think again. 82, a lot of people seem to think this misconception: I have given my data to Microsoft, I have given my data to Google. They'll take care of it, they'll provide the cybersecurity for me. That's just not how that works. 82% of these attacks that you hear about in the news that are being reported on, that are being reported and causing damages, are happening in the cloud. The cloud is someone, at the end of the day, is just someone else's computer. It is a real problem. Public, private, multiple environments, it doesn't matter. And that is from the Cost of a Data Breach Report 2023 IBM. I'm going to take 60 seconds here to allow comments and answer comments in the threads. But go ahead and please, if you have any questions or just comments that you want to add to this webinar, go ahead and post them now. We're going to go ahead and take 60 seconds here just to give people a chance to chat here. Just looking right here, making sure nobody commented on our live webinar. Doesn't look like we have any comments coming into the main feed. Okay, we're going to keep on trucking. Okay, so we left off with reporting that 82% of these attacks we're seeing, these cybersecurity attacks we hear in the news, are happening in the cloud. Let me tell you a story about how this relates to a startup, because that's what you're here for, right? I'm not MGM. I'm not a multi-billion-dollar business. Why would the criminals come after me? Well, we have had many a time where we are seeing criminals now go after one person, two-person, five-person organizations and taking lucrative amounts of money from those organizations. I have taken a story that was an incident our firm dealt with. I've changed certain details, names, how the event went down to protect the identities of those involved. But this story is from a real life example that our firm has dealt with and unfortunately had to assist with. Small business hack, a story. Once upon a time, in the bustling city of Techville, lived a diligent employee named Sarah. Sarah worked for a small, reputable financial firm and was known for her meticulous attention to detail. One day, while sipping her morning coffee and going through her emails, she received a message that appeared to be from her boss, Mr. Thompson. The email was perfectly crafted, mirroring Mr. Thompson's usual tone and writing style. It read, "Sarah, I need you to review this financial report urgently. There seems to be a discrepancy in our accounts. Please check the attached document and get back to me ASAP." The email had an attachment named financial_.pdf. Sarah, being the diligent employee she was, immediately clicked on the attachment, eager to resolve the issue. However, unbeknownst to her, she had just fallen victim to a sophisticated spear phishing attack powered by generative AI. It's a webinar in 2023, guys. You knew generative AI was going to make an appearance, right? The email was not from Mr. Thompson. Hold on. Not Mr. Thompson, but from a cyber criminal who had used generative AI to mimic Mr. Thompson's writing style. The AI had been trained on numerous emails and documents to create a convincing forgery. The attachment was not a financial report, but a malicious software that now had access to Sarah's computer. Now, what I'm not going on to say, I'm going to leave this here. More often than not, employees that are in Sarah's position, they might choose not to say anything. They might go, "Oh, nothing happened. This email clicking on was a mistake. I'll just pretend like nothing happened and go on my way." But Sarah, being the employee now for a financial firm, has access to tons of sensitive information. Great example of this. In this specific instance, Sarah had access to the main checking account for the business. She could log in, see financial transactions. What the criminal could have done and may have done, I'm not going to get too many details here, is log into the bank account, change the email address on file so the receipts aren't being sent to Sarah or her boss anymore because they have access to her computer and they can usually harvest passwords or just reset the password. They got access to her email through her computer. And then from there can wire themselves sorry about that, I dropped for a second. And from there can wire themselves 10, 20, 30, $50,000 to themselves directly. And that's just small potatoes, but that's where it starts. Whether you are bootstrapped, pre-seed, or preparing an IPO, you are a target for cyber criminals. It's not a matter of if, It is a matter of when, and all available statistics point to that. No problem. That's where cyber insurance comes in, right? Maybe you have cyber insurance. I work a lot with venture capital backed, and part of the investment requirements is that they carry cyber insurance. Yes and no. Cyber insurance is a beast of its own. Now, full disclaimer, I am not an insurance professional. I am not authorized to sell insurance nor authorized to advise about insurance from an insurance industry professional standpoint. I'm going to exclusively talk about my experience helping people get cyber insurance as far as the technical stuff. So, I lost my slide deck. Hang on a second. That was weird. There it is. Sorry about that. So, from cyber insurance standpoint, these applications tend to be longer. They're full of technical questions. Do you have a disaster recovery plan? Do you have penetration testing? Do you have vulnerability scan? And what frequency do you do vulnerability scanning? What kind of EDR do you have? Do you have MXDR? I mean, these are questions they go into. And we do have to ask ourselves a question because it has played out in court. There have been actual court cases where this has been played out in full. Specifically referenced last year, a court case done by Travelers, where if you are misleading in any way in the application, there can be a possibility coverage is not going to be provided in full. That happened in court, and there it stood up in court. If you have cyber insurance as well, and I'll talk about my policy for a second, I have cyber insurance. I have multiple millions of dollars. I can tell you right now, for the five most commonly found cyber attacks that that are applied to businesses like myself, my sublimits in the policy are a little over 10% of the aggregate. So financial fraud, I might have $5 million in coverage, but I only have a $500,000 supplement specifically if someone takes money from a bank account. Or I might have $2 million in a general aggregate, but if someone ransoms my computer, I'm only given $250,000. That's usually the norm. So insurance is a bit of a rat's nest, and it's really become the business equivalent of you have to have car insurance and wear your seatbelt. We have to have cyber insurance and also be preventative on your cybersecurity. Just because you have one does not mean you don't need the other. The security challenge and the reason this is all changing is because the statistic pointed in the business's defense or the business's favor, and they're not pointed in the cybersecurity professionals' favor either. First off, let's start talking about this. Half of companies lost 11 to 20% of their client base after a ransomware breach. 11 to 20% of revenue loss. 92.4% of attacks are delivered via email. On average, it takes 120 days to discover a data breach. 58% of attack victims are small businesses, and 60% of small and medium sized businesses go under within 6 months of a breach. That kind of makes sense, unfortunately. Think about it. When you're a bigger business, you can ride out, like an MGM, $100 million in losses for a quarter until the insurance claims filled, or until the revenues replace the coffers, or whatever. Plus, when it comes to reputational damage, cybersecurity stuff tends to be a little bit more on the shorter term, and that the first year, 6 months to a year, is where it really sticks heavy in people's minds. So your revenues can be down during that point. If you're a venture capital backed organization, you're going to be relying on your investors' funds to replace that revenue, which means nobody's happy. If you're bootstrapped, it's even worse. You got to pull those funds out of nowhere. As a bootstrap, I tell you right now, you took away 20% of my revenue. I would be hard pressed to keep running my business the way I am right now for the next 6 months. I'm not saying it couldn't be done, but it'd be incredibly exerting and emotionally tolling. So, how do you respond to these cybersecurity threats, right? In light of the stats I just showed you over here, that 60% of businesses go out from underneath, right? Like, what is your response supposed to look like? What is the healthy response? It's supposed to be fear of uncertainty and doubt? No, I don't think so. That's not how we need to go about this. The criminals and the hackers treat it as a job to steal your data. First, you need to understand why they do what they do. This is a commoditized market for them. They are a lot of times media likes to portray cyber criminals as guys in hoodies with glowing red keyboards in the dark room. Or if you're a little older, you might remember the movie Hackers. I love that movie, cult classic, where everyone's like in trench coats and sunglasses in a dark room, hack the world, all the other stuff. That's not what a cyber criminal, for the most part, looks like nowadays. And I'm not saying there aren't some that still look like those the latter two I just mentioned, but or the former two, I should say. Most of the time, they look like me. Guy in a polo, sitting in an office somewhere, maybe a whiteboard with a headset and a computer, working some kind of standard hours to make a paycheck because they can have predictable revenue returns. Cybercrime is incredibly lucrative and it's not full of a ton of risk, especially when these criminals operate from countries with no extradition treaties with their targets. We dog on Russia a lot when it comes in the media, when it comes to cybercrime. One of the reasons for that, allegedly, and actually, no, this isn't alleged, this is actual fact. For the most part, Russia does not extradite its citizens for criminals, especially right now in the current climate. So criminals using the internet, living in Russia, allegedly, now this part is allegedly, can target US businesses with little to no legal repercussions so long as they stay in the borders of Russia. The commoditization, the business mindset has changed the security landscape because more and more criminals are joined. It's gotten easier, things like automation and AI. Even in the last year, the security landscape has changed dramatically again. We're having to reinvent our security playbooks every year, it feels like. So, cyber risk checks. We're going to talk about the risk managements I mentioned before. Can we avoid it? Statistically, no. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Things have changed. We just to embrace that sooner or later someone's going to us and we're going to be hit in some way. Someone's going to make a mistake. Someone's going to click an email like we did Sarah and my story. Someone is going to give a little too much information, take the wrong phone call. It's going to happen because these criminals aren't going to stop. And thanks to tools like automation, thanks to tools like AI, they can scale. Can we share it? Not really. Most SaaS software as a service companies only take very specific responsibility when it comes to cybersecurity. Basically, if it involves their backend systems, yeah, sure, they'll secure that. But if it involves something like your user accounts, for example, if your username and password stolen and used to cause a data breach, terms and conditions on both Microsoft and Google specifically waive all liability in that scenario. You they don't they and they to my knowledge, I think there is, and this is something I just heard recently, a court case that's might be testing that with 23andMe. Now, I'm not sure where I read that, so don't quote me on that. But for the moment, no. For the most part, the cyber attacks we're talking about do involve user access, do involve stealing your credentials, your access, your ability to get into the platform. So sharing it, practically speaking, is not really viable. Can we transfer it? Yes and no. Insurance, I'm never going to tell anyone not to get cyber insurance, but it's not a complete transfer as we allocate it. It's much more narrow and targeted risk transfer. You can kind of talk to an insurance professional to get more details on this, but long story short, there are very hard sublimits. It's hard to get coverage that's significant, and even if you can't get coverage, the premiums have gone up. I can tell you personally, with my policy, I am paying between 2019 and now about I think maybe hang on little over a little under 4 times the amount in premium. So my annual premium cost has gone up almost 4x in 4 years. So the applications, they're also tricky a lot of the times, and they often require the insured to attest they maintain risk mitigation measures. All this stuff means that you shouldn't put all your eggs in the basket just on having an insurance policy. It's not complete transfer. So that leaves us with two remaining options to address. Either you retain the risk or you reduce the risk. Retaining the risk isn't attractive to anybody, right? Like, no, you wouldn't be at this webinar. I mean, I think how to manage cyber risk for your startup is the title of this webinar. Nobody truly wants to retain the risk. So that practically leaves us with one other option that we need to reduce the risk. I'm going to go ahead before I go any further and just ask one more question. Is now the time to reduce your risk? Or sorry, manage your risk, I should say. But reduce is what we're talking about. It's now the time to start, right? Is this a good time? My argument is yes, it is. Health startup MyNurse shut down and because of data breach exposed health records. They went out of business. You can look at this article here. Revolt data breach exposes information more than 50,000 customers. Multiple data breaches. It suggests EdTech company Chegg didn't do its homework, alleged FTC. I mean, this article after article about how a data breach adversely affected the long-term health of a startup trying to scale. We're going to pause here for any questions. I'm going to check the comments. 60 seconds again. and then we'll keep on trucking. Okay, we're going to move on here. So, is now the time to manage your risk? That was the last place we left up on. You need to get the data. So, if you've answered yes to that, if you answered yes, now is the time to manage my risk. I need to start doing something, right? Well, before you can do something, you have to understand what the problem is you're trying to address. You need to get the data to make the right decisions for your business. This is not something you want to play whack a mole with. I would recommend identifying your current risk exposure before you do anything else. Figure out what risk you have, right? What is the realistic risk for your organization? Because every business and organization is different. They have unique risk profiles, they have unique amounts of data they hold, or what kind of data they hold. I mean, you can just imagine there's a wild difference between a healthcare facility and someone like a SaaS startup. Right, like healthcare and SaaS. We work with pharmaceutical companies, we work with tech startups. I can tell you right now, their requirements and what the kind of data they handle totally different. And anybody who's in those fields would absolutely be nodding their head right now. There is some similarity. So you need to figure out what the specific risk exposure is for you. We recommend a cyber security risk assessment. Any kind of cybersecurity risk assessment. Now, you want this to be done by someone who knows what they're doing and has a track record of being a professional engagement. It is a professional consulting engagement if you do a proper cybersecurity risk assessment. You investigate how your current security position looks like, whether it's effective. You determine how susceptible your business is to an attack. You enable how likely your staff or employees are to enabling or furthering some kind of attack. Again, remember my alliteration, Sarah. She clicked the email. That was the facilitation. If she had known to be a little more paranoid and check the email or call Mr. Thompson or something else, there's a whole lot of other things we could have gone through there. Maybe we could have mitigated that. Identify physical and procedural weaknesses in the business that enables the attack. And also, of course, identify the most likely risk business assets. If you're running some kind of amazing thing in AWS, for example, that's your lifeblood of your business, chances are you want to make sure it's redundant. Now, that one's not usually too big of a deal, but I digress. Our cybersecurity assessment, for example, if you went through us, looks something like this. And I'm not going to go through each one of these in detail, but just so you can understand, we sit down with the executive sponsor of the company. We go through any kind of relevant security policies. If you have a physical environment, if you a lot of clients nowadays are completely remote work, that's totally fine too. If you have a network of some sort, network can be either like an actual network, like a VPN, routers, all that stuff, or it can be your SaaS application environment. Are you using Google? Are you using Microsoft? Are you using Dropbox? Are you using some other data room? What does that look like? Speaking of data, we want to make sure that you're only hanging on the data that you want. A lot of times, organizations have baggage. Data retention policies are a thing for a reason. Even in startup world, there's data a lot of times that you had no idea you had, even because it was saved in some random folder on one of your employees' computers. And next thing you know, it's 10,000 records considered a PII, and state law gets involved. We don't want that. Intellectual property, make sure that is being kept under lock and key properly. It's not shared in the cloud on a public. One of the things I like to tell people, and some people know this, some people don't. If you right click and share something in Google, for example, but you don't share it with a specific email address, Google will give you a link unless you set it up to have that turned off. And then you can copy and paste that link to whoever you want to access your stuff. What most people don't realize is generally that link stays live and it's the same link forever. So robots know that Google links exist, and hackers train bots to figure that stuff out and download things from any open links. We make sure there's no open links there, for example, just as an example, what that can look like. Users and systems reviews. Are your users doing smart things? Is their computers up to date? Are there any applications that are outdated? Dark web research. There are a lot of usernames and passwords floating on the dark web. Great example of this, 23andMe was breached last week, and allegedly it actually wasn't 23andMe itself that was breached. Some hackers gathered up a whole bunch of usernames and passwords that are floating on the dark web, plugged them into a bot, and then logged into a whole bunch of people's 23andMe accounts successfully, I might add, because people reuse passwords, and pulled down their entire genetic profile, probably for some kind of scam in the future. It was a big deal. So we want to make sure nothing like that's floating on the dark web that we need to know about so we can put an end to it. Excuse me. And then finally, a team behavior test. We're going to fish your users. We're going to do some social engineering. Nothing too crazy, but just to see how street savvy they are, for lack of a better term. Oh, sorry. Here we go. Findings and recommendations. Once we're done with this, we're going to give you a findings and recommendations report. Basically, we'll go through your risk review and we'll say, hey, this is what we found. We'll explain it to you in a way that you can understand, and then you can have feedback on. We'll give you a consultation so you can start planning your next steps of what you want to do, if anything, and we go from there. So that's a professional engagement, right? And I do strongly recommend, obviously, anybody who is attending this webinar consider it. That being, and if you are just go ahead and schedule today with the QR code on the top left-hand corner. We'll happily take you through it more in detail on a cyber strategy session. But maybe you're not quite ready for that step yet, right? Maybe you're still kind of thinking, is this really for me? I'm not sure, but like, how do I know what I'm looking at? We get it. So what I'd like to offer instead is, and this is at a $250 value, a free do-it-yourself 10-minute cyber risk assessment. That's right, free $250 value DIY miniature risk assessment. This is obviously not as comprehensive as what I just described, but it is a great place to start, and it is set up in a way that any entrepreneur, business leader, or investor can do themselves. So you can just scan this QR code or go to the URL posted on the slide and fill out a quick form so we know where to email the assessment to. The form is emailed to you, and that's it. No strings attached, no cost, free of cost. Sorry, I said that twice. DIY miniature cyber risk assessment. I'm going to leave that up there for 30 seconds and see if there's any comments in the chat for questions and answers that I can offer. Okay. That is it for me, guys. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, you can see my little rack behind me and the thing. Thank you so much for attending our webinar today. I really appreciate your time. Cybersecurity risk is rising, and there, I get it. We live in a scary time. I am going to say I believe it is behooves any business to look at addressing this problem proactively and not addressing it reactively. Not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, because things have changed. I don't know where the future is going to take us. I don't know where this road's going to end. Obviously, things are a little bit frightening right now in the world at large, and there's a lot of stuff going on. I do think that this, for the foreseeable future, all logic and data points to cybersecurity risk continuing to rise and only get worse. So I believe in giving back to the community with this free risk assessment, with the free cyber strategy session, and trying to proactively help people protect the thing they are poured their lifeblood into building. My name is Logan Edmonds. I'm CEO of Tabernacle Technology Solutions, cyber risk guy on LinkedIn. Have a great rest of your day, a great weekend, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye bye.